Okay, tonight we're going to have a short tech talk on a starter bendix. There isn't a whole lot to say about the starter bendix, but I'll see if I can stretch it out a little bit. I don't think I can confuse you because it's pretty straightforward. Basically, on a Model A starter, if you ever pull your starter off, you're going to look at something strange on the front of the starter. It looks like this. This is the starter bendix. And this is the thing that can give you some problems. Originally, it didn't quite look like this. And originally, the starter looked like this one. This is kind of a cruddy starter, and it's an early 28. I didn't clean it up because basically it's just a parts starter. But they had a lot of problems with this in 28, and it wasn't until about 29 that they went to this other style, and it solved a lot of problems. Originally, this one there was called an Able starter. It was made by the Able company, and it had a very small shaft on it versus the shaft of the later one. The early one, if you didn't advance the spark, chances are you jammed it and you could bend the shaft. You see how that shaft is bent? Well, most all of them have a bent shaft when it's that small one like that. The starter drive on it was a lot different than this one is. I don't have the whole thing, but you can kind of get the idea that there was quite a difference on it. And according to service bulletins, you had to shim it when you put it on the flywheel housing. If you didn't have less than 1/8 of an inch clearance, it's bound up a lot of times. And of course, you're looking at a multiple disc clutch in there, which is different than the regular flywheel that we have in most of the Model A's here. And so it was real touchy, and it was a little different spring-loaded affair, and it was just one problem after another. I mean, all during the 28 service bulletins, they were talking about all the different problems they were having. They even had a problem with the starter switch. The starter switch used to look like this, and it sat on here like so, and had a big wedge sticking up. And when you stepped on that starter button, it went down and touched that wedge. Well, they were great for shorting out. This one here has been burned out, so you can't get exactly what the idea is there. But you know, on your regular starter switch, I put a little Jewish chrome on this, make it look a little better. But originally, you had the cable attached to the back of it, so that was a problem too, because getting back there with a wrench without getting a short was really interesting. Well, anyway, you can get the idea of it. Originally it was back here, later it was up there on top. So, and this plunger was held in place by a cotter pin, whereas the later style it's screwed in. And there was a locking nut on there to keep it from backing itself out. Occasionally, if you don't have a nut on this, and I'm just as guilty as the next guy of not putting a nut on there, road vibration can sometimes make this come out. And it's amazing, when it comes out, a lot of times it just drops right down there on the stud. Well, it's good for sparks, believe me, and it will kind of weld it. I remember one time I was at an auto show down at the auditorium, and we had to disconnect the battery from your starter. And I was down there working on it, and I had my wedding ring on, and I got my wedding ring in there. You talk about a blister around my wedding ring, it was unbelievable. It do really get hot, believe me. Cause it's
that 28 starter switch rod you got there,
that
first series was the offset one.
Yes.
And the reason they stuck all the time is because it was offset, and it was always pushing down at an angle.
It depended on how big your foot was, too, I think. Because there was a step in this, a dog-leg step in it. And I don't have one of those anymore, and it doesn't make any difference. You'll probably never see one. If you might see a few of these, and if you do, just leave it where you found it, because you're probably not going to use it. This is kind of good because it's a little bit bigger than what that is, but you can take this button and put it on your accelerator. It'll interchange. El, you had a question?
Can you exchange the 28 starter with the newer model?
Yes, you can do it. They talk in there about a problem with the multiple disc clutch, and the with a multiple disc clutch, the clutch housing is on the back of the flywheel. And you got those 5 discs that go in there, and they talk about proper shimming and stuff like that. Well, to measure the shim, whether or not you need a shim in here, you have to measure your distance in here and your distance from the flywheel to the flywheel housing, and I just can't imagine. I mean, it's a nightmare. But fortunately, the best part about it is most all of us don't have a 28, early 28 with a multiple disc clutch, because that's a whole nother ball game if you got that. You don't have one of those in your car, do you? Good. I think that's a real plus. So anyway, they went to this later style here, and it was much better, and that's the one they used throughout the rest of the time. Now, believe it or not, there was 3 different styles of bendix drive. There was 3 different styles of bendix spring. This bendix spring has a little different twist to it. And the reason why it has a little different twist to it, I had a customer brought me his Model A one day, and he said he replaced the bendix spring and it made this funny noise, and nothing happened after that. So he figured there was a problem. Well, there was a problem. This isn't a Model A. It's wound a different way. It's probably GM or, I don't know, Plymouth or whoever. But anyway, rather than break it, it just twisted it like that. I'll send it around. You can take a look at the 2 of them. The early one that goes with this Able starter, instead of having a loop on both ends, almost a closed loop, it was just kind of a C. And you used a different type bolt in there and a different type nut. And they were kind of a problem too, because it didn't hold it real good and tight. So basically, what's the idea of this whole starter? I mean, why do we need it? Well, it beats getting the crank out and cranking it. So it was the modern day automatic starter basically for 1928 and 1929. When you went to start it, you always had to push up on the spark lever. Still do today. Do you know why you have to push up on the spark lever? Besides breaking a bolt, one of these little bolts like this, or breaking the end off the spring, what you're doing, you're adjusting for the spark in the cylinders versus the gas. If you don't push it down, your lever will have a backlash, and what that can do is screw up your starter drive, not to mention break off one of these bolts. It used to be, when I pulled a car apart, there was all kinds of bolt heads down in the flywheel housing. And believe it or not, I think it's the only bolt on a Model A Ford that's Ford script is the one that holds the bendix spring on. Here's a couple examples here. I used to have several, and I don't have too many anymore. One of them's kind of tough, and the other one you can read pretty well. But that's the only ones, I think, on a Model A that has a Ford script on the head. Kind of unusual. Why, I don't know, but that's just the way it was. So anyway, I told you that if you don't push up the spark lever, a lot of times you can break that bendix bolt. If you break the bendix bolt, the starter is not going to work. If you break the spring, the starter is not going to work. Now, I told you there's 3 different kinds of springs. There's 3 different kinds of bolts. And there's 2 different kinds of springs that we could still have today. You look in some of the catalogs that sell these bendix bolts, and they'll ask you what size you want. Well, they're listed one right after the other, so pay attention when you order it, because if you're like me, you got a 50-50 chance of getting the wrong one. So when you got your starter out, take a good look at it and see if it's a big bolt like this. The big head like this has got a big shank, whereas a smaller head has got a smaller shank. Now you're going to get 2. You're going to get one with a tab on it and one without a tab. You also have to have a lock nut. These little lock nuts have tabs on them, and when you put it on the bendix, those springs, yeah, they're still going around. I can show you here. When you put it on the bendix, one of the tabs goes down in a crack of the bendix spring, you get that nut tight, and then you tighten up the other one to come up on the lip of the bolt. Be sure to do that, because there's a lot of vibration going on in there, and if it comes out, you're going to go on a fishing expedition, or else get out your spare and use it. So you really got to pay attention if you're going to order extras, and I would order an extra, because you never know. Even if you get good at pushing up the spark lever, that's not to say that one of these bolts might not break. Well, then you're either going to get the crank out, or you're going to push it to start it. One of the two.
Sizes of bolts made at the same time, or was it a changeover?
I don't know exactly when the changeover was. Most of these big ones say bendix on them, and the smaller ones, they'll have a number on them, or I don't think it's a part number, I don't think it's a company name or anything. I really don't know what the story was on that. Haven't been able to find out.
What sizes those are.
What's that?
That shows you in the service book what
Yes.
sizes those are.
In the catalog, if you order new ones, it'll ask you what size you want, 3/8 or 5/16, I think. But pull your starter out if you don't have, if you don't have it out already, and figure out what size you need. Because like I say, if you just, well, I think I'll take this one. You got a 50-50 chance of getting the wrong one. And if you got the wrong one, by the same token, you can't put a small one in a hole that takes a large one, because it isn't going to fit in there tight. So that's just kind of what the problem is. Now, these bendix drives are kind of touchy in a way. I'll send this one around, and this one's a little rough. And this will kind of lead you to see why sometimes you get a bad spot on the ring gear. A lot of times the bad spot on the ring gear starts when you don't push up on the spark. It kind of jams things in there, because you'll try to start the motor, and then all of a sudden it gets real tight. Well, if it gets real tight, and this got to be freewheeling here. There's a little guide pin that sets in here. If that guide pin is spring loaded, if that little guide pin gets sloppy loose or breaks off, this doesn't stay real tight on that swivel in there. Why, I don't know. It's strictly a guide is all it is. But if it gets loose or breaks off, it doesn't let this go up and down on this shaft very tight or very evenly, and this piece will come loose from the rest of the gear. Well, because it's just pressed on there basically. If that happens, then you're probably going to have a problem starting the car. If you get a bad spot on the ring gear, and most of that time is due to that starter drive. Now, you'll wonder how in the world that happens, because this is super tight stuff, or strong stuff I should say. But you look on this ring gear and you'll see these spots, and here we got about 6 or 8 teeth that have some bad spots in them. The worse the spot gets, the more apt to having your starter come right back, or not your starter, but stopping right back at this bad spot again. So then you step on your starter switch, and if this is really bad, it binds up the starter. Well, you got 3 choices there basically. One, you can kind of rock the car and see if you can break it loose. Be sure to have the key off if you're doing that. If you're outside and you're pushing it back and forth, definitely have the key off, because if it starts all of a sudden, you might be chasing your Model A down the driveway. The other thing you can do is take the starter off, and if you take the 3 bolts out, there's 3 bolts that hold it on. If you take those 3 bolts off, if it's jammed in here real good, you're going to have to take a board or something, block of wood or a hammer or whatever, and get it between the block and the starter and pry down on it or smack it before you get her loose. Now, after you get it loose, I would pull the starter out and make sure that this bendix drive is still in good shape in here, because if it's not, you might as well stop right there and replace that, because you're going to be pulling it apart before too long anyway. So just check yourself out and see how bad the situation is. Get one if you need it, and you'll be fine. But it's really strange, I think, that it can chew these teeth up like it does. So far this spring I've changed 2 of these ring gears. in order to change the ring gear, you have to pull the motor out. If you pull the motor out, you're taking the radiator off, you're taking all the headlights out, taking all the wiring out, and you're pulling the whole motor. Your other choice is pull the rear end. But believe me, it's just about as much work no matter which end you're going after. Tony?
You change those, you just turn them around, use them the other way.
I change them. There is a bevel on them.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it works to turn it around. The bevel's there for a reason, and it's to get these teeth to go into that ring gear easier. If you turned it around, I'm not so sure that it would go in there as easy.
It works.
And if it doesn't, then you're starting to get a whole bunch of rough areas. You might even ruin the starter drive. Well, yeah.
Stop at two places, so there'd be two places where the wear is bad, and you can't just turn them a quarter of a turn.
Yeah. But if you're going to go to that much work to turn that ring gear, you still got to pull it apart. Because this is fitting on here tight. I mean, super tight. You can see the punch marks on this, and I took this one off an old flywheel that I had because I didn't have another one that was this chewed up to show you. But it's put on there by heating it up and expanding it and dropping it on there. The other thing is, if you replace the ring gear, I would have the flywheel and the clutch balanced. If you were running real smooth beforehand and you put another ring gear on there and you put it all back together, you might not run as smooth. We don't know how true these are. And it's a good time to do it when you got everything apart, especially for smooth operation. So no matter which way you go, it's a lot of work to change it because you got to pull it apart. I don't care what you do. It's got to come apart. And if you're going to pull the motor out, it's easier to pull the transmission with it. Take everything apart at the universal joint, pull it out as a unit, because when you go to put that motor back in there, about the time it reaches the pilot shaft on the front of the transmission, you're going into the rear motor mounts. Well, if you've got good rubber in the rear motor mounts, it's going to be fitting in there real tight, and even with a spring or a frame spreader, you still got a real ball game ahead of you, unless you got 2 or 3 guys helping you, because it can be a real picnic, and there'll be some blue air before it's all over with, I'll guarantee you. Definitely will. I'll send this halo around, you can look at it. What's that?
There's 3 things to do with your starter use. What's the third?
Basically, you're going to have to pull it off. There's no 2 ways about it. That's all there is to it. Now, if you pull that starter off, pay attention, because I've seen this a couple times, and this is a good example here. If I can get this off of here. I didn't bring any tools. Here we go. While I'm taking this apart, when you pull this end cap off of here, the first thing you're going to come to is a keyway. In the shaft, you're going to have to pull the key off of there before you can get the rest of this off. Now, here lately, I've been seeing starters that have a big bolt in the back and a little bolt in front. So that means either you're going to be changing this to make both holes big, or like Elle said, you're going to order 2 sets, a big set and a little set. But that's another thing to pay attention to. And these will interchange. There's basically 3 sizes of these. Elle?
What does the spring actually do? It's engaged there. Does it give it a little bit of spring so that
It engages this into the starter
so
to turn it over.
What does the spring do? Does it give it a little
What makes it come back again? Yeah, makes it return.
I thought the weight is the counterweight on that.
This spring kind of sorts the shock.
It just takes up the shock.
Yeah, it takes up the shock, but it helps bring it back to home point. Yeah.
on a newer car, doesn't the newer cars have a clutch in there now that'll wear out?
I don't know. I have so much fun with the old ones. I haven't messed with the new ones.
Yeah, there's,
Can't tell you.
some of them have an arm that physically moves this gear.
Yeah, the Chevys for a long time used a solenoid, and that solenoid, it turned on the starter, plus it also energized. When it energized, it pulled back and it drew your gear into the flywheel.
Okay.
You know, at the same time the starter going.
Okay.
So when you got off the starter and that solenoid relaxed, of course, then the spring in it would draw the bendix back.
Uh-huh.
And the other starters are always on the left side of your, on the passenger side.
Back to what you're saying about the 2 volts.
Yeah.
Is that because somebody switched it around over the years?
Yeah, somebody has switched it around.
Okay.
There was probably a problem with this one, and it was originally a big bolt one, and it might have broken.
Everything's fine.
Well, yeah, they'll still fit. You don't have quite as good of a tight fit in there like you should have, but it will work. Now another thing, Ford came out with a special part. It was this little sleeve right here. Believe it or not, it was developed for cold weather starting. A lot of times what happened in cold weather, especially in the Midwestern states, you had heavy oil in the engine, so you went out and everything was cold and you went to start it, these broke. Or the front part of this broke. So they made this little sleeve. It has a part number. You put this bugger on here like so, and it's just a little reinforcing thing. There's 2 of them. A little reinforcing thing to keep that from exploding. You still use the bolt, same washer. Make sure it's tight. They caution you to don't make it too tight to split this little deal because it's just a piece of sheet metal. There you are. Tighten her down.
That was a dealer item, right?
I think it's got a Ford part number on it.
That was so if it exploded, it wouldn't send parts into your
Yeah.
your
You don't find them. I can't remember whose catalog. I think it's an older Snyder's catalog. I saw them advertised in there. And I thought, what in the world is that for? Because it really doesn't tell you. Well, then I was looking for something else in the service bulletins, and presto, I found out what it was all about. But that's strictly for cold weather starting. That's all that's for. I'll send it around, you can get a better look at it.
So if that thing shattered, it would put stuff to your gear.
Yeah, yeah. You'd have more parts in the flywheel housing.
Have you ordered any ground straps lately out of the catalogs?
No. What I've been doing, I've been watching for ground straps at swap meets.
Wait till you get a new one. Don't about this long.
Is that all?
They don't make them short ones anymore now. I don't know what you're supposed to do with all.
I've been watching for ground straps when I go to swap meets, and that's one thing. Just about every swap meet, I'll buy 1 or 2.
Lloyd ordered one the other day, and I went there. It's about this long.
Nice long one.
What in the world?
Well, you can put it anywhere you want to put it then, see? You're not limited to that 6-inch one. Every now and then, I don't know how many of you guys still go to a swap meet. I'm getting to the point where I'm about ready to quit going to a swap meet because there isn't any old car parts there anymore. But I picked this up at a swap meet not too long ago. Starter drive spring, still in the original box. It's the bendix spring, had the bolts in it, had the washers in it. Man wanted, no, it didn't. Man wanted $5 for it, and I said, okay, I'll take it. Thank you very much. Away we went. But even now, you hardly ever find even a spring there, let alone one in a box like that. You can buy the bendix spring. Here's one from Snyder's. It says it's an officially licensed product, and they work good. I've used them. They work just fine. On the starter switch, we'll go back to that for a minute. This newer type starter switch, for a while, they were pretty bad. When you stepped on the plunger to push that down inside to make contact on top of the starter, the little liner in here, now this one you can hear it's pretty tough. The little liner in there was kind of a paper. And I mean paper. If this brass piece got over towards the edge, it'd tear that paper right out of there. They were really, really bad. And as far as the locking nut goes down here, this nut usually wasn't down there real tight. Well, if this gets over to the side, past the insulator, you're going to have a short in there.
Well, no, cheaper when you do down, if you push down too hard on that plunger,
Yeah.
it flips over the front. And then
Yeah.
you really have fun, because it gets hot in a hurry.
This is the inside of the starter switch. Believe it or not, in this little sleeve right here, this is what's in there. It's a piece of fiber. It goes in this hole right here, sits in there like that, and when you push on that, you're bending this copper strap and it's coming down and making contact on that terminal right there. Well, even these were made pretty flimsy for a while. If the point broke off or got really worn so it wouldn't stay in this hole and it was cockeyed, look out, because you're going to get a short, big time. But they have gotten better. I think there were so many problems with it that they finally improved it. This one here isn't too bad. The latest one is made by Ventique in California, and when you look at the stud in here, it's a lot better than this one, and it's made better, it's put together a heck of a lot better, and it's made so it stays put. They aren't real cheap, but if you buy a good one, no matter what the price is, and it works, so much the better.
The good ones are a little heavier metal too, Don.
Yeah, they are. This is a little heavier than this one, and the ones before this one were really cheapos. A swap meet find. Ford tag is on this, and this is a whole bunch of the little lock washers for the bendix spring bolts. This comes from digging in the boxes. They usually aren't laying out on a table anymore. You got to dig in the boxes in order to find them, but they are there to a certain extent. When you put one of these starter switches on, remember last month I told you about these fuses? That fuse screws right into the side like that. It's a good item and it's easy to put on. You just take those two screws loose, put that on there, and you're all set. Does anybody here have an early 28 that might have this type of a starter switch?
Early 20s, but I don't know how early.
Okay. Well, if you've got this style of a starter switch rather than this one, I hope you got this one. Because life gets interesting with that other one, believe me. Also, there's usually a little insulator that goes on top of the starter. It goes underneath here, and that's just in case something happens here and it falls out, so it doesn't drop right down on the starter switch, or I mean on the starter unit itself, and you get sparks flying in there, and they will fly, believe me. Aside from that, that's about all there is about the starter bendix. As long as this works real freely, you don't necessarily have to grease it or oil it. It's going to get greasy and oily anyway on its own, so you don't have to lubricate it. But try to keep this little plunger in mind. Make sure that it's good in there, good and tight in there, and everything works good. But pay real close attention, and I would get a set of extra bolts put under the seat. I carry both styles in my car. Right off the top of my head, I can't tell you which ones I have in my coupe, but just in case, or if you need one, I've got one. Huh? I carry a whole bendix, the whole bendix assembly, the spring, the end cap, the whole works.
And a crank.
And a crank. I always have a crank. Now, while I was looking up different things about that Able starter, I found a couple things in the service bulletins I thought you might be interested in. Labor charges as of December of 29 to replace the top material on a leatherback four-door. The leatherback four-door has got the top material on the top. It comes down the back, goes around the back window, and comes around where the quarter windows would be. To replace that top in December of 29 on a four-door, the dealer charges you $10.50 a labor. To replace the top cover on a sport coupe. Now this is the whole cover on the sport coupe. $9.
You're gonna have to lower your own.
I guess I will. To replace an anti-rattler spring on a brake rod, 40 cents. It gets better. To recharge your battery, including removing and installing the battery back in the car, $1. Now, if you wanted a loaner battery, it costs you 25 cents a day. Prices have gone up just a little bit. Anybody got any questions about this?
You know, Don, I should have brought it on that starter switch
Uh-huh.
on the Huckster a couple years back. That switch would pop out. Believe it or not. This piece here actually would come out.
Yeah. It's got a...
And you can pop it back in. It may stay for a week, it may stay for 3 weeks, or about 3 or 4 times a day. And if that isn't fun, because as soon as you hit it, you know that's it. Why it comes out, the whole thing will come out of there.
Well, the reason that does that, let me see that. There's a flare on the end of this tube, and there's also a flare on this housing. One of the two or both was worn down, and he's got big feet, so it probably is part of the reason why it wore down. Well, then with this screwed in all the way, there wasn't a whole lot of excess play in there. So when Bigfoot put his foot on the starter, if he put it on there at a little bit of an angle, he probably popped it out when he took his foot back off again.
You like to be smashed before.
Well, that's exactly right. That's my point. I didn't want to say it, but that's my point.
Then the other thing he's talking about, that starter freezing up. Before I put the other motor in the Huckster, when we was down going to Branson, this car had a habit, it would freeze up. And a lucky day would be if you could rock it and kick it out. An unlucky day is to knock all the bolts loose and slap it on the back and get it to pop out. You put it back in and go. Well, when I was going to Branson with Mike House, and he had my 2-door, we tried everything. No, we ain't going to take it off. We're going to pull it. Gentlemen, you can pull that damn thing across the station. It ain't going to come out. It just doesn't work. You might as well bite the bullet, take the bolts out, smack it. When it comes free, you go again until it freezes up and go again. But it's a nonsense deal. Like, huh?
You gotta rock it back and forth.
Everything I tried, it wouldn't do it. The only thing you do is just take the bolts out and smack it.
Basically, the motor has to turn over backwards.
Yeah.
You can put it in reverse.
You're going forward, you're going the wrong way.
Well, no matter what, no matter what you're doing, be sure to have the key off. Because if it comes back and it starts all of a sudden, look out. If you've got your starter out, I'll give you a little tip. When you go to put that starter back in there again, always put the top bolt in first. Don't start with the bottom one, and don't start with the hardest one over here. If you put the top one in first, there's a little recess here that's going to go into the flywheel housing. So you got the top one in there, you're all lined up. So you get this one in there, you don't have to tighten it all the way, but you're lined up for the other two. Just an automatic thing. But if you get the other two in there and you tighten it up, don't forget to tighten this one up. Roger.
Another thing you can do, and I've seen this happen several times, you put the bolt that was down below there, you put too long a bolt in there, you wedge it right against the flywheel.
Yep.
And turn over.
Yeah. That's a real short bolt, and it's going to look like some of the other bolts, like the bolt that holds the flywheel housing to the block. The heads look the same. It can be a flathead hex bolt, but it's going to be a little bit longer. Well, if it's a little bit longer and this sticks out here and hits that flywheel, either you're going to hear a screeching noise that sounds like the neighbor's cat's in there, or else it's going to absolutely freeze up, one of the two. So be sure to put the shorter bolts in there. If you're mixing all your bolts up when you're pulling the whole thing apart, put some little tag on there or something to remind you of the fact.
These 3 are all the same, though, right?
These 3 are all the same, yeah. They're fairly short, about like that. It's this this thickness plus about that much more, and a little bit more for the lock washer. Okay.
One time when my car was just restored, I had a problem with mine. I hit the start switch, and it actually kind of welded itself to that little copper terminal there.
Uh-huh.
And
On top of the starter?
and
Yeah.
it just sit there and turned over and over.
That's when that rod jumped over the front of it. Push down too hard on the cheap ones, that'll jump, it'll push that down right over the front of that. Then you got a direct short.
Well, it won't go over the front
Yeah, it will.
because, well, not on this style, because it can't get any further than that if you're screwed down all the way.
The ones I had, we could go over.
You might have a problem with this wedge-shaped one, but not with this one. It could be in the starter switch too, on some of those early starter
I
switches.
think mine was just kind of flimsy.
Yeah.
Didn't have enough spring to bring it back.
Mhm. The ones that Rex used to sell were really good ones. And J.C. Whitney was another one. They had some pretty lame
How long
starter
did it take to
switches.
get the floorboards on this?
John.
During my early times, when I first started playing around with Model A's, well, you'd hit the starter, and all the starter would do was just turn it when you go to the flywheel. Well, what it was, the bendix was dirty,
Mhm.
and it
Gets all gummed up. Yeah.
That's another thing you might.
Yeah. That's another thing you want. Make sure this is going.
Starter, and get the motor started, she really makes a noise, boys.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about.
Frank looked hard, man, I tell you, that baby was screaming, we shut it off. Frank said, what do you think's wrong? I said, I don't know, start up again, I didn't hear it, they started up, call Roger, let's see what they say with it.
Here's something I brought just to kind of show you what it looks like. I don't know whether you've seen them or not, and this is fairly new to the market. It's better than the first one that they started reproducing, but it's the whole gas gauge. You also get the outside nut and the brass washer that goes with it. But it's pretty good. It's made real nice. They've got kind of a hokey cork on it. It's a two-piece cork. It's still a cork rather than that unsinkable float that you can buy and put on there. But the writing on here is real good. They've got black in there. They've got the lines on there for your marker to see.
Cork, needed ethanol?
I think I would change the cork. If
I would definitely change the cork, yeah. This one has got some kind of a white stuff on there, but I'm sure that with today's gasoline, it isn't going to make it. But here's another one. It's an old original. You can compare the two and see how nicely it's made. I think it's made by Ventique in California.
Did
But it's,
anybody happen to read the new article in the paper that they're trying to phase out Ricker altogether now in
Yeah.
the Midwest area? Yeah. That ought to be a real
the
treat.
more corn the farmers grow and the more ethanol plants there are, the more we got a problem. I got a car, I should have brought the filler screen. I got a car in the shop right now that's got, when I pull the filler screen out, it's got a white powder on it. It looks just like flour. When you touch it, it acts like flour. And that screen is just loaded inside and out with that.
Dealing in cocaine now.
Yeah. It dissolves cork, the cork gasket in the gas cap. It was down in the screen. It just kind of shrinks it up. The sediment bowl had a neoprene washer in it. It destroys that neoprene washer. It gets hard, makes cracks in it, it just falls apart. The shutoff valve was plugged with something that looked like gray putty. You would not let any gas go through it at all. The whole hole was absolutely plugged. I pushed a awl through there. I could get the awl through there. It was almost kind of semi liquidy, soft, let's say. But it stayed right on the shaft when I pulled it out. I don't know what kind of gas he was using in there, but I'm guessing it was probably gas with more than 10% alcohol.
It was.
Roger.
Early gas sealer they used it. They come out with it a long time ago, wasn't it?
The tank did not have any sealer in it.
That stuff you could get just like
Yeah.
snot. I mean, you know,
The tank has not been sealed.
Really.
To look down in a tank, you couldn't see any in there. I flushed the tank, and a little bit of that gray stuff came out. In the gas line from the shut-off to the sediment bowl, the bottom half of the gas line had some sediment in there about halfway up, and it was more of that gray stuff.
You think it's methanol? Yeah, it is.
I think it might be heavier than 10%.
Really?
Yeah.
I've been to put some new plastic tubes on street trimmers and stuff lately. When I bought the new tubing, one of those definitely, the whole inside of the old tube was covered with this white stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I bought the new stuff, the guy said that definitely was alcohol.
I was talking with a fellow here the other day, and we were talking about ethanol and gasoline, and he said, well, I always be real careful when I go and pump at the pump. Make sure that I don't get any of that. Well, you think about it, and when you pull up to a gas pump, you've got 3 different grades that you can get.
One hose.
One hose. That's the whole thing right there. Who's to say that the guy before you didn't buy one that had a lot of ethanol in it? All right. Your first squirt, whether it be this long or as long as the hose, your first squirt is going to be the nasty stuff. And it's going to be in your tank. Now, if you're buying 10 gallons, maybe it won't make any difference. But if you're buying a gallon and you're putting it in your lawnmower or whatever, a chainsaw, you're going to have a good dose of that extra ethanol in there. So I don't know how you get by with it without doing that.
Lately is water flowers. When I fill my tank in my car, and I want to gas my lawnmower,
Do the car first
lawnmower, put the first gallon of gas in the tank. And
in the car.
and
Yeah.
fill the tank after that.
Yeah. That's probably the best bet.
What Model A engines run on alcohol though?
Not really.
They would.
They will, but they really weren't. Basically lead-based gasoline. In
Lead-based gas didn't come out for about that Model A.
yeah, I think it was 33 or 34. There was a gas company, or a filling station company in Lincoln, and their gas pumps looked like a big corn stalk, or not a corn stalk, but an ear of corn. It was painted that way, and they were pushing ethanol gas. Well, the refineries didn't like it, and they could make the lead gas cheaper, and as a result, they went out of business because they couldn't compete. I've got a picture, and there's an article about it at home. I'll bring it in sometime, and you can take a look at it. It's kind of interesting. But way back in 33 or 34, it was like that. Larry?
I put 5 gallons of E85 in my yard truck just for the fun of it.
And then what happened?
It starts harder. You gotta open up the carburetor more to keep it running smooth, and it smells funny.
Really?
It smells like Coleman Ladders.
In other words, don't use it.
Well, it'll work, but I wouldn't recommend it.
I'll be darned. Did you use it all up already?
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. L.
I forgot about
Oh.
But it was important, right?
Does somebody else have their hand up while he's thinking? Okay.
Changing gears on real quick on motor oil, are you using, in the absence of zinc problem in the Model A, or should we be putting a zinc replacement like PDP? What do you find?
Roger, what's your take?
Well, there was a lot of talk about that when they first took that out of there, but they've put something else in there to replace that, so I don't think we'll have a problem whatsoever.
I know in the Pontiac muscle car, it's destroyed.
Cams,
Yeah.
they're high performance cars, and the cams
It
have a lot of pressure on them, and it's hard on them.
Yeah.
I don't think Model A should have a little
Around 8,000 RPM.
The machine shop that I use to balance flywheels and surface heads and stuff, he sells a straight weight 30, and I can't remember the brand of it. He gets it in the East somewhere, and he swears up and down it's stuff that we should be using in our cars and any older motors that he rebuilds. Bill's Machine out in Florence.
I carry a straight 30.
I can't. Well, this is a different brand.
No, I mean, yeah, straight 30 weight bins oil,
Yeah.
not a mix. Do we need detergent or not?
Whatever you start with, stay with. Don't mix back and forth. Yeah. You remembered. Okay.
the added, the other additives to try to alcohol?
Not really.
Diesel fuel, I don't know.
Diesel fuel will help a little bit.
That's what Beckman does.
A cup of coffee in the
He gets,
morning.
he gets the tank in, no, he puts a gallon of diesel in on top of it.
Well, the diesel works good too if you're real hot and you're running, you know, and you're running a Zenith carburetor. You can hear the gas boiling in the carburetor because that cast iron conducts the heat. Well, if you put a gallon of diesel in there, you're spraying for mosquitoes, but it sure runs a heck of a lot
How
smoother.
about two-cycle oil?
I don't know. I can't answer that.
That would be lubricant.
Yeah, probably would.
I know one thing, outboard motor oil don't hurt a thing. I don't know that in mine once in a while when I put it, fill the tank clear up.
Yeah,
It don't hurt it.
that's fine if you got outboard motors sitting around, but oil sitting around. But I don't.
I remember my dad had a John Deere, and he would put a little oil in the tank every once in a while when he was working it hard.
Yeah. Well, that's all I got, guys. I'll leave this stuff out up here. You can take a look at it.